I watched as her hand struck across Zora's face, the sound echoing through the cabin like thunder. The flight attendant's eyes burned with contempt, her voice dripping with venom. "You people never know your place," she hissed. The entire cabin fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. What the attendant didn't realize was that the quiet black woman she'd just assaulted wasn't just any passenger. The jet she demanded Zora know her place on, Zora Prescott, owned not just the aircraft but the entire aviation company. I witnessed something that day that changed how I view power, prejudice, and the quiet dignity of true leadership. If you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of appearance, hit that subscribe button and share where you're watching from. This story might just change your perspective forever. That moment when palm met cheek froze time itself. The dozen passengers aboard Elite Sky's luxury jet gasped collectively. Some looked away in discomfort, others stared in shock, but nobody intervened. The flight attendant, Diane Wilcox, stood tall, her uniform crisp and perfect, radiating authority. Opposite her sat Zora, dressed in simple jeans and a worn sweater, now with a red mark blooming across her dark skin. I was seated 3 rows back, close enough to see the slight tremble in Zora's hands as she steadied herself, but what struck me most was her eyes. They didn't show anger or humiliation. They showed calculation, assessment, and a quiet power that seemed to fill the space around her. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged solely on their appearance? The assumptions we make about others based on how they look or dress can reveal more about us than about them. In today's story, we'll explore how these judgments can lead to devastating consequences and unexpected redemptions. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the story well if you believe in the power of stories to change perspectives. Comment below with a time when you were misjudged based on appearance. Your experiences matter to our community. This isn't just a tale about a wealthy woman teaching a lesson to someone who wronged her. It's about the choices we make when confronted with prejudice. It's about the responsibility that comes with power and how true leadership isn't measured by how we treat those who can help us, but by how we respond to those who don't. As we journey through this story together, you'll discover powerful lessons about dignity, prejudice, forgiveness, and the quiet strength required to break cycles of hate. So settle in. What happened after that slap changed not just Deanne and Zora, but everyone who witnessed it, including me. To understand the gravity of what happened on that private jet, we need to go back to where it all began. 2 women from 2 different worlds, on paths destined to collide. Zora Prescott wasn't born into wealth. Quite the opposite. The eldest of 4 children raised in Baltimore's Westport neighborhood, she grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment where her parents worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Her father, Malcolm, loaded cargo at the port during days and drove taxis at night. Her mother, Gloria, cleaned office buildings downtown and took in neighborhood laundry on weekends. "We didn't have much," Zora once said in a rare interview, "but we had books, hundreds of them. My father would bring home discarded books from the wealthy passengers in his taxi. My mother taught us that education was the one thing nobody could take away." From an early age, Zora showed exceptional aptitude for mathematics and computer science. Her high school teachers recognized her talent, helping her secure a scholarship to MIT, a world away from Baltimore's struggling neighborhoods. There, brilliance wasn't enough to shield her from reality. I remember my freshman year, a professor asked if I was lost when I walked into his advanced computing class, Zora recalled. When I said I was enrolled, he laughed and suggested I might be more comfortable in a different program. I stayed silent, took a seat in the front row, and finished the semester with the highest grade in the class. This pattern continued throughout her education and early career. Assumptions made, capabilities questioned, achievements attributed to luck or quotas rather than skill. Yet Zora persisted. After graduation, while working at a mid-level tech company, she developed a revolutionary algorithm for detecting cyber threats before they materialized, essentially predicting attacks based on scattered digital signals. When she presented it to company executives, they dismissed it as theoretical at best, fantastical at worst. Determined to prove them wrong, Zora took the biggest risk of her life. She pawned her grandmother's gold necklace, her only inheritance, borrowed money from community members back home, and launched Prescott Security Systems from her studio apartment. 8 years later, PSS became the leading cybersecurity provider for Fortune 500 companies. The algorithm those executives had dismissed, it now protects banking systems handling trillions in daily transactions. At 42, Zora's net worth exceeds $3 billion, making her one of only 2 black female tech billionaires in America. Despite her wealth, Zora retained her pragmatic nature. She wore simple clothes, drove a modest electric car, and lived in a comfortable but not ostentatious home. "Wealth changed my options," she often told her staff, "not my values." Diane Wilcox's story couldn't be more different. Born to upper-middle-class parents in Connecticut, she'd always been taught that status mattered. Her father, a bank manager, and mother, a real estate agent, emphasized appearances, connections, and the art of recognizing important people. After college, Diane pursued a career in aviation, attracted by the glamour of flight and proximity to wealth. Starting with commercial airlines, she quickly realized private aviation offered better access to the elite circles she admired. For 27 years, she cultivated an ability to identify wealth at a glance. Designer labels, high-end watches, certain postures and mannerisms that signaled importance. "Diane was exceptional at recognizing who mattered," said James Monroe, captain of the elite Sky Jet and 15-year colleague. "She could spot a CEO in coach or an heir in economy. Some found it impressive, others found it revealing." What many didn't see was how this skill came paired with biases that had calcified over decades. Diane had developed rigid ideas about what success looked like, and more problematically, who was allowed to possess it. When Elite Sky was acquired 6 months before the incident, Diane assured colleagues her position was secure. "The new owners won't change operations," she confidently stated. "They need experts like us who understand high-net-worth clients." The supporting characters in this story each played crucial roles in what unfolded that day. Andre Prescott, Zora's younger brother and chief operations officer of PSS, had scheduled to join her on the flight to Chicago for meetings with potential clients. More outspoken than his sister, Andre had less patience for prejudice. "Where Zora sees teaching moments," a colleague once noted, "Andre sees accountability moments." Layla Washington served as Zora's executive assistant for 7 years. Having witnessed her boss's calm response to countless microaggressions, Layla understood Zora's philosophy. True power isn't shown by how quickly you can destroy someone who wronged you, but by whether you choose to at all. Captain James Monroe, a former Air Force pilot with 20 years in private aviation, had seen plenty of entitled behavior from both staff and clients. What happened that day, however, would mark his career forever. Among the passengers was Devin Reynolds, a young black entrepreneur pitching his startup to investors in Chicago. Watching Zora's treatment would impact his own approach to leadership in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Have you noticed how prejudice in professional settings often masquerades as standard procedure or company policy? This raises important questions. When we witness discrimination in professional environments, do we recognize it? Do we speak up? Or do we convince ourselves it's simply how things work? As I watched Zora and Diane's first interaction that morning, neither woman recognized how significantly their lives would intertwine. Diane saw only what she expected to see, a person who didn't belong in her carefully curated world of luxury. Zora saw something different, a reflection of attitudes she'd encountered throughout her journey. The clash between these worldviews, one built on assumption, the other on experience, was about to create a moment that would transform everyone on board Flight ES-317. 6 months before that fateful confrontation, Zora Prescott made a business decision that surprised Wall Street analysts. Prescott Security Systems acquired Elite Sky, a luxury private aviation company catering to ultra-high net worth individuals and corporate executives. The $420 million purchase barely made headlines in business journals. A relatively small transaction for a company of PSS's size. "Aviation seems like a departure from cybersecurity," one analyst commented during the quarterly earnings call. Zora's response was characteristically measured. "The wealthiest individuals and largest corporations are our primary clients. Their security extends beyond digital networks to physical transportation. This acquisition allows us to protect them across more touch points in their lives." What she didn't mention publicly was her personal interest in examining Elite Sky's operations. Throughout her career, Zora had encountered countless situations where her race overshadowed her credentials. Private aviation, with its emphasis on exclusivity and assumptions about wealth, presented a perfect case study. "I want to see if the level of service changes depending on who the client appears to be," she told Andre during a strategy meeting. "Are our staff truly serving all clients equally, or are they making snap judgments?" That question led to her decision to fly incognito on Elite Sky's Chicago route. She selected a Monday morning flight typically filled with business travelers and deliberately dressed down in worn jeans, a simple navy sweater, and minimal jewelry. She carried her laptop in an old messenger bag rather than her usual leather briefcase. "Andre will join later," she informed Layla. "I want to board alone first to see how they treat me without recognizing who I am." Layla nodded knowingly. "Just like the time you attended that tech conference without your speaker badge, and security wouldn't let you near the stage until the CEO intervened." Zora smiled at the memory. "Exactly. Sometimes the most revealing insights come when people don't know they should impress you." The morning of the flight, Zora arrived at the private terminal 15 minutes before boarding. The front desk staff was professionally courteous but noticeably cooler than she'd observed them being with other clients. She received basic directions to the waiting area without the usual offers of refreshments or assistance with luggage. As passengers boarded the Gulfstream G650, Diane Wilcox stood at the entrance, greeting each with practiced charm. Her smile remained fixed when Zora approached, but subtle changes revealed her assessment. Eyes briefly scanning Zora's simple attire, a slight stiffening of her posture. The temperature of her greeting dropping several degrees. "Seat 4C is there," Diane said briskly, gesturing toward the back of the cabin near the galley. Despite the jet being half empty with premium seats available, no "welcome aboard" or "can I take your jacket" was offered. Zora thanked her politely and moved toward the assigned seat, while other passengers received immediate offers of pre-flight champagne and hot towels. Diane bypassed Zora repeatedly, attending to white passengers who boarded after her. When Zora finally raised her hand to request water, Diane's response was telling. "We'll begin service once we're at cruising altitude," she said dismissively, despite having just served drinks to the passenger across the aisle. 20 minutes into the flight, when refreshments were finally being distributed, Zora received a plastic cup of water while others were served in crystal glassware. When she requested coffee, Diane's response came with a curt reminder. "The premium beverages are complimentary for our regular clients," she said, emphasizing the word regular while glancing meaningfully at Zora's clothes. "I believe all beverages are complimentary on private jets," Zora responded calmly. "That's typically the service model." Diane's lips tightened. "I'll check what's available for your section." The pattern continued throughout the first hour. Differential treatment so subtle it might go unnoticed by those not experiencing it directly, yet unmistakable to anyone familiar with such treatment. If you've ever been treated differently based on assumptions about who you are, perhaps judged by your appearance, accent, or name, hit the like button right now. Your experience matters, and acknowledging these moments helps others recognize they're not alone. As the flight progressed, Zora observed similar interactions with Devin Reynolds, the young black entrepreneur seated 2 rows ahead. When he requested the in-flight Wi-Fi password, Diane informed him it was for premium clients only, despite it being standard on all Elite Sky flights. Each interaction confirmed what Zora had suspected. Elite Sky's service excellence contained a significant blind spot. The question wasn't whether bias existed, but how deeply it ran through the organization she had acquired. What she couldn't have anticipated was how dramatically the answer would reveal itself. As the Gulfstream G650 reached cruising altitude, the pattern of differential treatment became more pronounced. What began as subtle dismissiveness from Diane evolved into increasingly obvious displays of bias. Zora remained observant, mentally documenting each interaction while maintaining her calm demeanor. An hour into the flight, a white executive in seat 2A requested assistance with his laptop connectivity. Diane rushed over, leaning close as she patiently walked him through the steps to join the aircraft's network. When he thanked her, she responded with a warm smile. "That's what we're here for, Mr. Harrison. Anything else you need, just let me know personally." 10 minutes later, when Zora raised her hand with the same issue, Diane's transformation was remarkable. "Yes?" she asked, standing at a distance, arms crossed. "I'm having trouble connecting to the Wi-Fi," Zora explained. "Could you assist me?" Diane sighed audibly. "The instructions are in the welcome packet. Did you read them?" "I did," Zora replied evenly. "I followed the steps, but I'm still having connectivity issues." "Our technical support is limited mid-flight," Diane stated, making no move to approach Zora's seat. "Perhaps you can try again when we land." A white businessman across the aisle raised an eyebrow at this exchange, making brief eye contact with Zora. He'd witnessed both interactions, and the disparity was evident even to bystanders. When meal service began, the differences became even more stark. Passengers in the front received detailed descriptions of each gourmet option, served on fine china with proper cutlery. As the service progressed toward the rear, Diane's enthusiasm waned considerably. Upon reaching Zora, she practically dropped the tray on her table. "Chicken or pasta?" she stated flatly, not bothering with descriptions. "What type of chicken dish is it?" Zora inquired. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's just chicken. If you have dietary restrictions, those should have been specified before boarding." "I'm simply asking about the preparation style," Zora clarified. "Is it the same rosemary chicken I saw served to other passengers?" "The meals are identical," Diane replied tersely, though Zora could clearly see differences in presentation. "Chicken or pasta?" "The chicken, please," Zora replied, maintaining her composure. When Diane moved away, Devin Reynolds, the young entrepreneur seated ahead, turned slightly and gave Zora a knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of a shared experience all too familiar to both of them. As the flight progressed, Diane's behavior caught the attention of more passengers. A middle-aged white woman in first class frowned as she observed Diane ignore Zora's request for a blanket, only to immediately fetch one for another passenger. An older gentleman shook his head slightly when Diane loudly asked Zora to keep the noise down after she received a brief business call, despite multiple other passengers conducting louder conversations. The atmosphere grew increasingly uncomfortable as these incidents accumulated. Some passengers became visibly uneasy, exchanging glances but remaining silent. That familiar bystander hesitation when witnessing discrimination? The situation escalated further when turbulence required passengers to return to their seats. Zora, who had briefly visited the lavatory, was making her way back when the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated. As she moved quickly to comply, Diane stepped directly into her path. "You need to take your seat immediately," she said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Safety procedures aren't optional for anyone." "I'm returning to my seat now," Zora replied calmly. "Next time, pay attention to announcements," Diane continued, despite Zora already moving past her. The sign illuminated almost 30 seconds ago. The obvious fact that other passengers were still moving about the cabin without comment made the targeting unmistakable. When the turbulence subsided and service resumed, Zora requested a glass of water. 20 minutes passed with no response. When she pressed the call button, Diane approached with visible irritation. "Is there an emergency?" she asked sharply. "No emergency," Zora replied. "I requested water some time ago." "We're very busy with priority clients right now," Diane stated. "Service to your section will resume when possible." A white passenger seated nearby interjected, "She's been waiting a long time. Could you just bring her some water?" Diane's expression flickered with embarrassment at being called out, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, I'll be right back." Her tone suggested this intervention was the only reason Zora would receive service. When she returned with the water, she placed it down with barely concealed contempt. "Anything else?" she asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. "No, thank you," Zora replied, then added, "Though I am curious, what constitutes a priority client on this flight?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. Diane's face flushed slightly. "We prioritize our frequent flyers and premium members," she responded stiffly. "Interesting," Zora noted. "I wasn't aware Elite Sky had different service tiers on private flights." This simple observation, highlighting the contradiction in Diane's excuse, caused several passengers to shift uncomfortably in their seats, the inequity now impossible to ignore. When witnessing discrimination, we often face a difficult choice: speak up and risk confrontation, or remain silent and become complicit. What would you do if you observed someone being treated unfairly based on their appearance? Would you intervene immediately, wait to see if it escalates, or avoid involvement entirely? Comment below with your thoughts. Your perspective might help others find their voice in similar situations. Little did anyone know that the simmering tension was about to boil over in a moment that would leave everyone on that plane forever changed. 2 hours into the flight, the aircraft's communication system chimed. Diane answered the incoming call, her professional voice returning as she spoke into the handset. Elise Skyflight, ES-317, this is Senior Flight Attendant Wilcox speaking. I couldn't hear the caller's side of the conversation, but Diane's responses were clear enough. Yes, we're en route to Chicago. Expected arrival in approximately 90 minutes. Yes, we have a nearly full cabin today. A pause followed as the caller apparently asked a specific question. Mr. Prescott? Diane's voice perked up with interest. No, I don't believe he's boarded yet. We have several priority clients on this flight, but no one by that name has checked in. Another pause. His sister. Diane's tone shifted to dismissive. I don't recall any passengers mentioning they were expecting family to join. Perhaps they're scheduled for a different flight? Zora, who had been reviewing documents on her laptop, looked up as she heard her family name mentioned. She raised her hand slightly to get Diane's attention, but was pointedly ignored. I can assure you, Diane continued into the phone, all our VIP clients have been properly attended to, and no one has mentioned expecting Miss Prescott. I'll be happy to check our manifest for our next flight to Chicago if you'd like. Zora stood and approached the galley where Diane was taking the call. Several passengers watched with interest as she waited patiently for Diane to acknowledge her presence. Excuse me, Zora said politely once Diane finished her sentence. I believe that call may be regarding me. I'm Zora Prescott. Diane covered the mouthpiece with her hand, irritation flashing across her face. Ma'am, I'm handling an important communication. Please return to your seat immediately. I understand, but that call is likely from my assistant, Layla Washington. She's calling about my brother Andre, who may be delayed in joining me. Diane's expression hardened. Ma'am, I know our clients. There is no Zora Prescott scheduled on this flight. Now, please return to your seat. There is, actually, Zora persisted calmly. I'm Zora Prescott, and I need to speak with my assistant. Something in Diane snapped. Perhaps it was the accumulated tension of her own biases confronting her, or the threat to her perception of authority. Whatever the trigger, what happened next shocked everyone aboard. You need to learn your place, Diane hissed, her voice low but venomous. In one swift motion, her right hand released the phone and struck Zora across the face with enough force to snap her head sideways. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. You people never know your place, she added, apparently forgetting she was still on an open call line. Complete silence fell over the entire aircraft. Zora's hand rose slowly to her cheek, where a red mark was already forming. Not a single passenger moved. Even the usual background hum of conversation ceased entirely. The handset dangled from its cord, Layla's voice faintly audible as she demanded to know what had happened. The cockpit door opened, and Captain James Monroe emerged, likely alerted by the commotion or possibly through the open communication line. What's going on back here? He asked, taking in the frozen tableau before him. His eyes widened as he recognized Zora standing in the aisle, hand pressed to her face. Miss Prescott, are you all right? He asked, rushing forward. Diane's face drained of color. Escott? Captain Monroe turned to her, his expression thunderous. Diane, what have you done? This is Zora Prescott, the owner of Elite Sky. The revelation rippled through the cabin. Passengers who had witnessed Diane's behavior throughout the flight exchanged shocked glances as understanding dawned. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. The owner? But you can't be. Her eyes darted from Zora's simple clothing to the captain's grim expression. Zora Prescott, the captain continued, voice tight with controlled anger. Founder and CEO of Prescott Security Systems, which acquired Elite Sky 6 months ago. I didn't know, Diane stammered, her previous confidence evaporating instantly. You didn't look like someone who could own a company? Zora finished for her, voice steady despite the red mark blooming on her cheek. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? In that moment, the power dynamic shifted completely. The woman who had been dismissed, ignored, and literally struck for not knowing her place now stood revealed as the ultimate authority on that aircraft, not just a passenger, but the owner of the entire operation. The irony was lost on no one, least of all Diane, whose face now reflected the dawning horror of her actions and their consequences. If you were on that plane witnessing this shocking revelation, what would your immediate reaction be? Would you feel vindicated for Zora, embarrassed for Diane, or something else entirely? Comment below with how you think justice should be served in this situation. Should Zora fire Diane immediately, or does this moment call for a different approach? Your thoughts might surprise you. The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Diane Wilcox stood frozen, her face a mask of horror as the full implications of her actions crashed down upon her. The hand that had struck Zora now trembled visibly at her side. "Miss Prescott, she began, her voice barely audible. "I had no idea. This is a terrible misunderstanding." Zora raised a single finger, silencing her instantly. "Captain Monroe, could we have a moment of privacy, perhaps the forward cabin?" "Of course," the captain nodded, his expression grave. "Passengers, please remain seated. We'll resolve this situation promptly." As Zora moved toward the front of the aircraft, Diane remained rooted in place, panic evident in her rigid posture. "Ms. Wilcox," Zora said quietly, "I believe you should join me." The walk to the forward cabin felt endless to Diane. Each step brought her closer to the consequences of her actions, her mind racing with terrifying possibilities. 27 years of career building evaporating in a single moment of unchecked prejudice. Once they were seated in the private forward section, separated from the watchful eyes of passengers, Zora spoke first. 27 years with the company, correct?" Diane nodded mutely, unable to meet Zora's gaze. "Before I address what just happened, I want to be clear that I've been observing your interactions with all passengers since boarding. The incident we're discussing isn't isolated, it's a culmination of a pattern of behavior. Monsieur Prescott, I want to apologize." "For slapping me?" Zora interrupted. "Or for the dozens of microaggressions that preceded it? For seating me by the galley despite the jet being half empty? For serving others drinks while ignoring my requests? For suggesting I wasn't entitled to the same services as other passengers?" Each question landed like a precise blow. Diane's shoulders slumped further with each one. I never intended," she stammered. "Intentions are interesting things," Zora said, her voice remarkably calm. "They often matter less than impact. Your intentions didn't prevent me from experiencing discrimination on my own aircraft." Tears welled in Diane's eyes. "Am I fired?" she finally managed to ask. The question hung between them, heavy with expectation. Everyone who had witnessed the confrontation would assume termination was inevitable, immediate and public. It would be the expected response, perhaps even the deserved one. "That depends," Zora replied, surprising Diane. "I have a question for you first. Why do you think you treated me differently?" Diane opened her mouth, then closed it. The automatic denials and excuses died on her lips as she faced Zora's steady gaze. "I made assumptions," she finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Based on how you looked, how you dressed." "And my race?" Zora pressed. A long pause followed. "Yes," Diane finally acknowledged, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "Your race." Zora nodded, not in anger, but in solemn acknowledgement of this difficult truth. "Here's my proposition, Miss Wilcox. You have two options." Diane looked up, confusion replacing some of the fear in her eyes. "Option 1 is straightforward. Your employment terminates today. You leave the aircraft upon landing with 2 months severance as per company policy." Diane nodded slightly, having expected nothing less. "Option 2 is more challenging," Zora continued. "You retain your position, but with significant conditions. You will work directly with our new diversity and inclusion team to develop a comprehensive training program addressing unconscious bias in customer service. Your experiences, including what happened today, will become a case study for all Elite Sky employees." Diane's mouth fell open slightly, genuine shock replacing her previous expressions. "You would allow me to stay, after what I did?" "This isn't about you," Zora clarified. "This is about the opportunity to create meaningful change within an organization I now own. Your behavior today wasn't formed in isolation. It reflects broader issues within Elite Sky's culture, issues I intend to address systematically. She leaned forward slightly. Your journey of confronting your biases, if genuine, could become a powerful teaching tool. However, let me be absolutely clear. This isn't forgiveness without accountability. This path would be significantly more difficult than simply leaving. I don't understand why you'd give me this chance, Diane admitted. Because firing you solves only one instance of the problem. It doesn't address the conditions that allowed your behavior to develop unchecked for years. True leadership isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. The choice now lay before Diane, the easy exit or the difficult path of growth and restitution. What will it be, Ms. Wilcox? This moment raises a profound question for all of us. Is redemption possible for those who have caused harm through their prejudice? When faced with discrimination, is punishment more effective than education? What serves justice better, removing those who exhibit bias or transforming them into advocates for change? Share your thoughts below on whether you believe people can truly evolve beyond their prejudices when given the opportunity. 6 months after that fateful flight, Elite Sky had transformed. The incident became a catalyst for sweeping changes throughout the organization, changes that reverberated across the private aviation industry. Diane chose the harder path. Her decision wasn't met with universal approval. Some colleagues believed she should have been terminated immediately. Others, particularly those who had witnessed her behavior's evolution over the years, recognized the powerful statement Zora made by offering reformation rather than punishment. Diane's journey began with a month-long leave during which she enrolled in intensive bias recognition training. Upon return, she partnered with Dr. Maya Collins, a renowned expert in workplace equity, to document her experiences honestly. The hardest part wasn't admitting I'd been wrong, Diane later shared during a company-wide training session. It was confronting why I'd been wrong. Examining beliefs I'd carried for decades without questioning their origin or impact. Under Zora's direction, Elite Sky implemented comprehensive structural changes. Service protocols were standardized to eliminate subjective treatment. Performance evaluations now included metrics on equitable customer interactions. Anonymous client surveys measured whether passengers of all backgrounds received consistent service quality. Most significantly, Elite Sky launched its Sky for All initiative, a training program that became mandatory throughout the organization. Unlike typical corporate diversity training, which often feels perfunctory, this program used real case studies, including Diane's own, to illustrate how bias manifests in everyday interactions. We're not interested in simply avoiding lawsuits or public relations problems, Zora explained in the program's introduction video. We're committed to genuine equity in how we treat every client, regardless of appearance, background, or circumstance. The passengers who witnessed the confrontation that day experienced their own transformations. Devin Reynolds, the young entrepreneur who had also faced dismissive treatment, reached out to Zora following the flight. Watching how you handled that situation changed my approach to leadership, he told her during their meeting. You had every right to demand retribution, but you chose reformation instead. That's true power. 3 months after the incident, Diane facilitated a training session where Captain Monroe served as co-presenter. Their candid discussion about that day, her actions, and his initial hesitation to intervene provided powerful lessons for the entire staff. I wasn't just harming Miss Prescott with my behavior, Diane acknowledged. I was undermining our entire mission as service providers. Every passenger deserves dignity. Not because they might secretly be wealthy or powerful, but because dignity is the minimum any human should expect from another. For her part, Zora rarely mentioned the incident directly. She didn't need to. The changes she implemented spoke louder than any individual confrontation could. Private aviation industry publications noted Elite Sky's transformed culture, with one article highlighting how the company's training program was being adopted by competitors. True transformation isn't measured in policy changes alone, but in daily interactions. Elite Sky's customer satisfaction ratings rose across all demographic categories. Staff reported greater job satisfaction and lower turnover. What began as a moment of confrontation evolved into a model for meaningful change. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might benefit from its message. Perhaps you know a leader who could learn from Zora's approach, or someone struggling with bias who might be inspired by Diane's journey toward growth. Every share extends the impact of these lessons beyond our community. Subscribe to The Story Well for more powerful narratives that challenge perspectives and inspire growth. Together, we're building understanding through the stories we share. Stories that remind us of our capacity for both error and redemption, for harm and healing, for transformation when we least expect it. Zora and Diane's story offers profound lessons that extend far beyond one private jet or company. First, it reminds us that prejudice often hides in plain sight. The assumptions we make about others based on appearance reveal more about our own biases than about the people we judge. Each time we categorize someone as not belonging in certain spaces, we perpetuate harmful patterns that diminish us all. Second, true power isn't measured by the ability to punish, but by the wisdom to transform. When Zora discovered she held complete authority over Diane's fate, she chose the path of greatest impact rather than the path of immediate satisfaction. This distinction separates leaders from merely powerful people. Third, accountability doesn't always mean elimination. By requiring Diane to confront her biases publicly and use her experience to educate others, Zora created ripples of change that extended far beyond what termination alone would have accomplished. Sometimes, the most effective consequences aren't the most obvious ones. Fourth, witnessing without action makes us complicit. The passengers who observed Diane's behavior throughout the flight remained silent until the dramatic revelation of Zora's identity. Their inaction highlights how frequently we abdicate our responsibility to stand against discrimination when we see it. Finally, transformation begins with acknowledgement. Diane's journey couldn't start until she admitted the truth, that her treatment of Zora stemmed from racial bias, not procedural adherence. Healing, both personal and societal, requires this difficult first step. The story of what happened on Elite Skyflight ES-317 isn't just about one flight attendant and one CEO. It's about choices we all face daily, to judge or reserve judgment, to punish or transform, to remain silent or speak up. As you move through your week, I challenge you to notice the assumptions you make about others. Consider what evidence supports these assumptions and what biases might be shaping them. This awareness alone can change how you navigate the world. For more stories that challenge perspectives and inspire growth, subscribe to The Story Well. Next time, we'll explore another powerful narrative about courage in unexpected places. Until then, remember that true change happens one interaction and one reflection at a time.